Hey guys, we have a lot to get through today. I'm gonna allow a couple of minutes for people to join. But then I definitely want to kick it off and get started for our September community call discussion. Hi, everybody. Good morning from the West Coast. We've got some West Coast on the call. I'm reporting live from New York, Cincinnati. You guys want to drop in the chat where you're calling in from today as people are joining? Got folks from all over. Happy September. How was everyone's no new clothes? A summer of no new clothes. How are we feeling entering the fall? Maybe drop one word, how you're feeling entering this season today. Hello, Arizona, San Francisco. I'm going to give it one more minute and then we'll get started because we have a lot to cover today. Feeling energetic. I love that. Refocused. Yes. Inspired. I always love to see that. Welcome, everyone. We're just going to let folks keep rolling in. In the meantime, I'm going to start recording. Oh, we are recording. We're good. All right, we are live. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Remake September Community Call. We're so happy to have you all in conversation with us today. My name is Holly. I'm Remake's community manager, and I'll be guiding us through today's program. If this is your first time joining us, welcome to Remake. Our mission is to connect the dots between fashion and justice and uplifting voices of garment workers, exposing the realities of supply chains, and building solutions together with communities, advocates, and industry leaders. And today's session brings all of those threads together, which I'm really excited about. To kick some things off for housekeeping, first, I wanted to mention that our community calls will now be on a quarterly basis. So we're meeting today and our next call will be in December. And also our big update from the summer is we are fully set up on our new community platform on Circle. If you have not yet joined us there, this is our new digital home where you'll have all of Remake updates, information about events and campaigns. I would encourage everyone to sign up if you haven't already. Allison dropped the link in our chat box to join, and we have a lot going on over there. So I'm excited to see everybody on Circle. Before we dive into our conversation, I just want to celebrate the incredible work that's happening in our community. Thank you to all of our Remake Gems who donate every month. You make our Changemaker program and resources and workshops free for all, and you keep our work alive. And I just want to encourage anyone to join our GEM program. We have a link going into the chat box right now if you can join. Thank you, Allison. From our community perspective, I'd love to invite Sarah to share about her recent fundraising success using our Give Lively campaign. She very creatively tied fundraising to sales in her store, showing us how business and advocacy can go hand in hand. So Sarah, I'd love for you to jump off mute and talk to us about what's inspired you and the impact you've seen through fundraising.
Awesome. Hi, guys. My name is Sarah. Thank you so much for having me to speak. This is my first time, so I'm a little bit nervous, but I'll just give you the story of kind of how this all happened and how I'm a part of you guys now. So I was a fitness and a yoga instructor for 10 years in my community, and I taught all over town. So I got to know a lot of people in my community. The yoga community is kind of like its own little small world. So Um, during that period of time teaching, my mom got sick and she passed away. And so teaching, the community was there for me, and it kind of really helped me get through that. And that was a really hard time of my life. And after that, I kind of went through my own personal story where after I came back from that, I had lost some weight and I started making better health choices, even though I was a fitness instructor. So one day I cleaned out my closet and I had a whole bunch of clothes with tags on. I was not a big thrifter, you guys. I've totally changed. I've totally changed over the years, but I started selling my clothing to my yoga and fitness community, and it kind of snowballed into them asking if I accepted donations. And I was like, heck yeah. So I felt kind of bad just taking their clothing and not giving back. So I'm like, okay, I need to give back at least a portion of the sales to charity on behalf of them. And just because it feels good to give back. I don't know, you know. So I had a yoga student approached me and she wanted to mentor me as a business partner. And it was really exciting. We had a brick and mortar for 1 year here in Southern California. So that was another way that we started receiving more donations. And unfortunately, the business partner didn't work out, but that's okay. We won't go into that part. I'll get into this part. This is really cool. So, well, kind of cool and kind of not cool. During the Hawaiian fires, I don't know how long ago, was that already a couple years ago? I don't know. So during the Hawaiian fires, I had been seeing this holistic doctor in San Clemente in my area, and like a few days after the fires hit, a girl from the front desk had called me, and she had been helping with the relief. So she had been getting insulin and sending it to Hawaii and this and that. And she was like, hey, we have this big warehouse full of clothing donations, and Hawaii is not accepting them anymore because clothing is littering the island at this point. Goodwill doesn't want them. We know you have a thrift shop. Do you want them? And I was like, let me rent a U-Haul. So I rented a big U-Haul, took a few trips back and forth to this warehouse, packed the truck up, brought it back to my house, put it in my driveway. I let some of my yoga and fitness students at the time come and pick through it, and then shoved it all in my garage, sold it at my shop until I had that place shut down. Eventually, sorry, I'm trying not to take up all your time. Eventually, I curated, after I shut the shop down, I curated all of it. I sent half of the clothing to a community in Tijuana, Mexico. So I think they got to sell or share it with their community, which felt pretty good. And now I sell my clothing on Depop since I have it organized, and I'm lucky enough at this point to be a Depop ambassador and a top seller because I have so much stuff. And so through sales with them, it's allowed me to raise money and just donate a portion to you guys. I found you guys on Instagram, and your like catchy marketing caught my eye, and I'm like, this makes perfect sense. So anyway, I
Thank
think
you so much, Sarah.
yeah, the watered down version. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much. It's so meaningful to hear such a vulnerable story. And if anyone on the call is interested in starting their own fundraiser, we have our Give Lively page here that's linked in the chat. And there are creative ways to do this, like Sarah has showed, like a Depop shop. So yeah, just an option for fundraising and collective action, but also just one individual can make such a huge difference. So thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing that today and being on the call. It's stories like yours that remind us how powerful our collective action is. And speaking of that, We are so excited to introduce Remake's fall campaign for this year. We will be launching our award-winning Made in Film series, which brings light to the lived experiences of garment workers around the world. These films, they educate and they also amplify the voices of garment workers themselves, who are very often unseen and unheard in the fashion supply chain. So today we are going to show the trailer spotlighting the Made in Sri Lanka film. This documentary, it shows a raw and moving look at the reality that's faced by garment workers in Sri Lanka, and just really highlighting their resilience. So Allison, if you could share the video, let's all just take a moment to watch the trailer together. It's a little over a minute, so it's not too long. But I would love to watch that together and get inspired for the fall campaign season.
Can everybody see the screen okay? Right now, to me, fashion means a lot of problems.
This is insane.
I think when people design clothes, they're thinking about the glamorous part of it.
Can you imagine working at this speed for hours?
ඒ නිසා අර ඉන්න පුළුවන් ගාන හරි වැඩ කරලා යන්න තමයි බලන්නේ.
පැක්‍රීම් බලන්න උපරිම වෙලාවක් වැඩ ගන්නනේ. ඉතින් ඒක එහෙම තමයි.
ඔව් ඉතින් අර එහෙම දැක්කහම උනත් දුක හිතෙනවා ටක් ගාලා ගෙදර කට්ටිය මතක් වෙනවා.
එතකොට කවුරුවත්ම නැත්නම් ඒ වෙනුවෙන් වැඩ කරන්න වෙන එකම දේ තමයි එක්කෝ වහල්ලු හැටියට මේක වැඩ කරන්න සිද්ධ වෙනවා.
There needs to be a lot of empathy. These are where my clothes are coming from. These are the women making these clothes.
I think I'm gonna have a totally different approach to how I create.
Thank you, Allison, for sharing. And thank you all for watching that. You can find our other Made in films on our YouTube playlist, where we explore the lives of workers in Nepal, Mexico, in China, in Haiti, Cambodia, and the US. We'll drop the link for our YouTube playlist here in the chat, but these films are an incredible resource that we look forward to sharing more and diving deeper into this fall. So thank you for watching that. And these films are why conversations like today's are so urgent. So to deepen this discussion for the fall, we are joined by two incredible leaders who bring both investigative rigor and systems level innovation to the table. I am now going to introduce Elise Zhang. She is a Remake Changemaker. She is a senior at Phillips Academy, and she is a published fashion economics researcher, a TEDx speaker, commentary writer, amazing artist. So welcome, Elise, and let her introduce our speakers today.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Holly. So hello, Remake. I'm so excited to be facilitating today's conversation on the supply chains that drive the fashion industry. And so I'll start by introducing our two guests. First is Sydney Badger, who is a global supply chain and sustainability expert with over 15 years of experience leading responsible sourcing and manufacturing initiatives. And as CEO of Mile One and former director of Textile Exchange, Sydney has worked with Fortune 500 companies and emerging brands to scale sustainable solutions in the apparel industry. And also joining us is Jonathan Mead, who directs Transparentem's investigative projects focusing on uncovering environmental and human rights abuses in supply chains. And for nearly a decade, he has played a central role in every investigation since the organization's founding, building on his earlier career as an environmental geologist and lifelong commitment to labor rights. So we are so honored to have both of them here with us today, and let's just jump directly into the conversation. So my first question is to Jonathan. Your work at Transparentem has revealed environmental and human rights abuses that often remain invisible to the public. How do these investigations unfold?
Yeah, really great question, Elise. And I just want to say hi to everyone. I'm really excited to be here. I've been just a huge fan of Remake for a very long time and have taken a tremendous amount of inspiration from your work. I think I first sort of clued into Remake around the time the pandemic was hitting and tons of brands were canceling orders, leaving both factories and workers in a lurch. And Remake's campaign to help hold brands accountable and to help workers during that time was just tremendously powerful. We were very excited to partner on that. So yeah, let me share a little bit about Transparentem. We have been in existence for about 10 years, and we do investigations into child labor, forced labor, environmental degradation. We use an investigative journalism toolkit, and so our investigations are very discreet. Companies don't know that we're completing our investigations, so we work with local investigators, often investigative journalists, to gather evidence. We compile reports. We usually focus on a supply hub that has an endemic issue, and then take reports often to 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 companies that are implicated, brands and retailers. And we then give them a window of time to respond to our findings. So often what that means is that companies conduct their own audits to confirm our findings and then ideally work towards solutions. Typically about 70–80% of the companies that we engage are able to make progress and implement solutions. Not every single project gets to the point of having every issue that we've highlighted solved, but we've been able to move the needle in a lot of areas, which we're really proud of. Yeah.
Good to hear. And actually, could you share a specific case study where investigative finds led to meaningful change for garment workers?
Yeah, so an area of work that's been really impactful for us is to look at the experience of migrant workers in the apparel industry. And we've done this in Malaysia, in Mauritius, and in Taiwan. So workers from other parts of the region take on often very significant amounts of debt to get jobs in a foreign country to work in the apparel sector. They're often deceived, and they often then don't make as much money as they thought they were going to make. Often their passports are withheld, and they have very abysmal living conditions. And they're basically just trapped for often years at a time before they're able to get out of debt and then hopefully make a little bit of money. But they're just in an extremely vulnerable situation. So we did a series of investigations initially in Malaysia. As I mentioned, we then moved to Mauritius and then to Taiwan as well. But the initial investigations in Malaysia were able to get 1,600 passports back to workers from whom they'd been confiscated. And we were able to get more than $3 million back to those workers as well as reimbursement for recruitment fees that they had taken on when they were coming to get those jobs. And then we were also able to bring about a more systemic solution, which was a pledge for more than 100 companies to not allow recruitment fees to be paid by workers in their supply chains. And in the years since, we've seen, with varying degrees of success, the implementation of that policy. It hasn't been perfect, but it's definitely been a significant step in the right direction and begun to change the paradigm. So workers don't have to pay for jobs and end up in enforced labor, experiencing several different problematic labor conditions as a result.
Thank you for sharing, Jonathan. And so my next question is to Sydney. What major shifts or trends have you seen in corporate responsibility over the span of your career?
Great to be here. Thanks, Elise, for the question. I mean, I'm so thrilled to be part of this conversation today. Much corporate social responsibility, and so maybe sharing a little bit about my career journey will help kind of shed a bit of the lens through which I look at sustainability and how it's impacted the work that I do. So I entered this having studied international relations and Chinese in my undergrad, and so I'd had this early exposure to China in the late 2000s. And I was completely blown away by kind of the rapid development and all the growth that was happening within China. And I wanted a reason to go back. I kind of got sidetracked by a corporate career in corporate fashion between American Eagle, Ralph Lauren, and then subsequently Amazon, where I was running and building very big, high growth businesses with zero attention to impact, triple bottom line, environmental impact, social impact. It just was not part of our playbook or part of any of the evaluation of how we were running these businesses. I think something within me was looking for something more meaningful. And in the late 2010s, I left Amazon to go and start my own fashion brand, as one does, with little to no experience. But that journey kind of really was the catalyst for my exploration into sustainability and understanding what's happening and how to make more responsible decisions on the ground. So I moved back to China in the late 2010s. I had the benefit of speaking Chinese, which really enabled me to understand and lean on the expertise of supply partners in Asia to really understand how it worked. And I think that was really what formed my work now on how we think about elevating production workers throughout the supply chain. But in general, the system does not elevate workers' voices. And I built a business called Public Habit, where the whole supply chain model was built on an on-demand production model. So everything was made to order with a 2-week turnaround supply chain. I wanted to move away from any overproduction because, as we know, I assume many of this people joining the call today understand how much overproduction is kind of endemic in the system. I wanted to kind of flip that supply chain script and work on demand-driven business models. So how do we think about just making what we sell? So that was the business I built. On the back of that, I built Mile One, which was kind of a supply chain services model that I've been running since then. I also took a role with Textile Exchange in the middle there, where I was able to lead their industry engagement work, where I really got to see this landscape of how corporate sustainability has evolved within major fashion brands, from Nike to Patagonia to Ganni to, real trailblazers within the sustainability sphere. But, it's changed dramatically in the last 5 to 10 years, where I think many of us who became really interested and really involved in this space in and around the pandemic, I myself included, I think saw sustainability as a space for innovation, change, and real opportunity for new ways of thinking about the system. And by 2025, I would say that is sadly no longer really where this sits within companies. So within typical corporate social responsibility today within the fashion industry is much more aligned with compliance and risk functions, risk mitigation within the supply chain. It's thinking about how whether it's how you think about alternate sourcing strategies so that you see less disruptions within your supply chain, how you think about certifications and compliance within your traceability programs within your supply chain. It's much more about how it's more aligned with kind of a PR function, I often find, than where it's sat maybe 5 to 10 years ago, maybe more closely embedded within supply chain. So it's been a bit of a disheartening shift, I would say, in the last couple of years, for sure. So it's a bit of a long-winded way of saying it really depends on the size, shape, and intention of the company. But I've had a really good exposure to how large corporations are looking at this and how small businesses are still trying to think about ways to embed sustainability into their businesses and more of a supply chain innovation model in this way that we did with Public Habit.
Thank you, Sydney, for that insight. My next question is to Jonathan. Despite improvements and progress, or also like deprogress, I guess, labor exploitation has not been eliminated from fashion supply chains. Why is this?
Yeah, really great question, Elise. I mean, it's interesting. So I, as a teenager, was a protester on the streets in New York. And at that time, probably the early 2000s, there was a different paradigm in place. So companies would simply say, we buy a product from a manufacturer. It's not our business how those workers are treated or what kind of effluent is released from the factory. That's not our problem. That's for the regulators in that country. And so I think sometimes it is helpful to take a step back and realize, okay, we do operate in a different sort of paradigm now where the conversation has changed a whole lot. And I think I gave this specific example to Holly and Allison when we were chatting, but like for example, we were, I think 14 or 15, we went into Walmart, we had coats on, we took off our coats, and underneath we were wearing t-shirts that said that Walmart uses child labor. And so we as kids had to be kicked out of Walmart by Walmart security. So that was just like kind of an example. But if you look at the arc of Walmart's experience at the time, they took zero responsibility for their supply chain, and that's very, very different now. Walmart has a whole, a huge team that focuses on that, and they're just much, much more sophisticated in how they at least attempt to address supply chain risks. And so unfortunately, on the one hand, we can sort of see that there are, and through our investigations, we often find just very, very abysmal conditions. So one of our investigations, for example, was in textile production in Tamil Nadu in India. And we documented, children, young teens working 12-hour night shifts in dusty spinning mills where they were often getting injured. Many of the workers experienced sexual abuse and had very, very difficult living circumstances. And in my mind, those conditions which we documented in like 2018, 2019, and we don't have, unfortunately, a great reason to think that the norm in the industry has radically changed there since then. Those conditions are not that different from like the early stages of the Industrial Revolution in the UK, or like the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, 1911, the kind of conditions that workers were experiencing then. So there's been some progress, but there's significant gaps. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about, auditing a little bit later. There's just some real gaps that mean that there's a need for better legislation, better enforcement of legislation. So yeah, there's a strange mix where we've made both a lot of progress, but yeah, there are still workers who are experiencing conditions that have remained largely the same for, sadly, hundreds of years. Yeah.
I'm in just on that. Just Elise, sorry if apologies. Just that made me think something about your previous question, Elise, about kind of what the arc of corporate social responsibility looks like. And one of the things that I think is an important nuance that I've noticed is, within an ESG or CSR function today, it often will span everything from environmental to social to governance. And I do believe that there is a lot of good intention behind how these companies are addressing this work, but because there is less clarity on how to evaluate the social impact side of the work, or there's less of a clear playbook or clear legislation in place of what rules to follow, often the work that gets prioritized is the decarbonization work around environmental, because it's much more measurable and there's clear carbon abatement goals that these companies can put into place. And I think that that's just kind of a macro point that I've been noticing within the industry, is everyone's kind of banded around decarbonization as the one thing they're really pushing forward with from a sustainability lens. And I think social often drops below the line when it's as we know, such a critical piece of this work. So just another layer that I think is important to keep in mind as well.
Thank you for that insight. Through my research as well, I've really noticed that as well, and how a lot of just social justice has dropped below the line because a lot of consumer focus has been on environmental sustainability, and so that's how companies respond. And actually, this is a question for both of you. What would make an apparel brand or manufacturer more likely to take corrective action, or after being presented with investigative findings, or how would they respond to consumer direction?
Sydney, do you want to go first? I'm otherwise happy to. Okay, yeah. So a huge part of what we do, I think I mentioned that we take our findings to companies. We give them a window of opportunity. For us, that's usually a few months. I think the shortest period of time was maybe 3 months, and then maybe the longest was more like 9 months. our founder sort of designed that into our model because as an investigative journalist previously with Bloomberg and other outlets, he would contact companies to get a response before publishing, but they would have a very short period of time. Then there would be a headline, and then companies would just sort of throw their PR teams and their legal teams to sort of weather the media storm, but they wouldn't really make systemic changes. So if you were to look back a few months later, a few years later, change often wasn't as meaningful as he had hoped it would be. So he founded us to try to take away the excuse of not having time or of not knowing what the issues were. So that's why we give companies that period of time. So we then do a media partnership often with like the New York Times, the Guardian, the Associated Press, or other outlets to then both tell the story of what we found, but then hopefully there's a positive narrative, which is the solutions that companies were able to put in place once they were made aware of the issues that we documented. And so we have now engaged, I'm just going to pull up the specific number, well over a couple hundred companies that we've engaged. And so we've seen a whole range of responses. Some of them just don't respond. Some of them try to distance themselves in any way they possibly can, with, sort of downplaying their supply chain connections. Some of them have an initial instinct to sort of cut and run. But most of them were able to sort of convince to engage constructively. And I think what we've seen is that companies that have reputation sensitivity tend to be the ones who respond the most constructively. And I just want to give that as a plug to Remake, the advocacy work that you guys do, and that other organizations that advocate with brands. Like that really is, I think, the primary reason why they engage constructively. I think that people at companies have some of the same instincts that we do to want to do right by the workers in their supply chain, but just the bottom line, I think, often doesn't really allow them to do so unless they fear that they're going to lose business because their consumers are going to step away. And so we've sometimes taken findings to like manufacturers because we're telling them about issues that were happening deeper in their supply chain. Typically, that has not gotten a lot of traction because manufacturers don't face reputation sensitivity. Similarly, companies that just don't have a face to the public in the way that the major brands that are household names do. They often seem to not do quite as much. So that's what I would say. And Sydney, please add on.
I think you've got a much deeper insight into the responses across the industry. But I think the only other layer I'd add is I'm sure many of us were following the stories out of the luxury industry with forced labor accusations within like the Loro Piana supply chain, for example. And I think what I find fascinating is that, to Jonathan's point, I mean, it's how do we weather the media storm around this? How do we distance ourselves? I do believe many of these teams that are particularly reputation sensitive are trying to do the work to understand and to root cause and to build better systems. But at the same time, it comes often back to how long before our customer forgets that they ever heard about this. And it turns out in luxury pretty quickly. Does ethics matter in the luxury supply chain or in the luxury industry? And I've seen some really interesting reports from Business of Fashion and other independent journalists kind of coming to the conclusion that it doesn't seem to really hurt their business when this happens. There does seem to be a lot of work happening within the Italian government to really try and root out some of these infractions, but whether that's actually significantly changing how the business operates is a different question.
Oh, thank you, both of you guys, for that answer. And my next question is to Sydney. From your consulting lens, how are early stage brands approaching supply chain strategy differently post de minimis? And it would also be great if you could explain what de minimis is.
Sure. Yes. So de minimis, for those, just as a refresher, was an and is still in some countries kind of a duty-free exemption for all orders coming into the US under $800. There is some version of de minimis in most countries, like in the EU, I think it's, I want to say 300 euros. Someone might better know this or can add it to the chat. I'm not entirely sure what the threshold is there, but you know, really this threshold was probably one of the biggest factors for Shein and Temu's rapid growth in the US market. So hundreds of millions of packages coming in every year under this duty-free threshold. And President Trump closed that loophole in April, and I think it went into effect pretty immediately after that. And so the question was, what would that mean for these ultra fast fashion players that really relied on de minimis for their business growth? I would say, you know, there's two parts to your question. Like, one is, has de minimis really impacted the ultra fast fashion players? And I think the other piece is, what does it mean for small businesses that I work with Mile One? And I would say that, you know, for context, my Public Habit, one of the big advantages that we had was that we would ship our products straight from the factory in Shanghai to our customers globally under this $800 threshold. And it allowed us to be incredibly competitive on price on these premium products. We were mostly selling cashmere and wool sweaters and coats. Our business we would have had to buy bulk inventory and ship our inventory into probably a warehouse, likely in the US, and store it just like every other major brand in order to run that kind of supply chain in 2025. The challenge with that model is you end up often with overproduction and overbuying, so that you bring in more inventory at a lower price. So the more you buy, typically the better cost you'll get out of your factories. You'll import that, you'll pay duty on those goods that you bring into the country, you'll warehouse them, et cetera, but sometimes it shakes out because you've gotten a better first cost on the product because you bought more of it up front. So my challenge I actually think closing de minimis has been a really important step to move us away from reliance on ultra fast fashion players like Shein. It is also causing brands to kind of lean even more into this bulk buying that we've been historically doing and moving production to lower and lower cost countries, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, even Africa, to try and kind of move around these this ever evolving tariff conversation and to keep those costs as low as possible, which is also meaning buying more bulk to meet some of those minimum order quantities. And I don't think we're really yet seeing what that means from an overproduction and excess in the system standpoint quite yet, because everyone is still just this ever evolving situation of tariffs.
And what barriers have you faced in your own supply chain transparency efforts?
For me?
Yes.
You know, I have always benefited from the fact that owning your supply chain relationships, especially through tier 1 and tier 2. So tier 1 is your kind of cut and sew finished good factory, the one who's actually assembling the final garment. Tier 2 being your kind of fabric supplier. Tier 3 maybe would be your yarn supplier. And then tier 4 all the way back to the farm level. So where, let's say, the cotton is grown. Going all the way back to the farm from a traceability standpoint can be very challenging in fashion today. There's a lot of work being done to try and drive some more digitalization of traceability efforts, and maybe Jonathan will be able to speak a bit more to some of that. But for your average small businesses under, let's say, $50 million in revenue every year that I work with, you're really leaning on real one-to-one relationships with your tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers. It's pretty rare that my clients are actually going as far back as yarn and tier 4 and farm level traceability. So that kind of puts the onus on really knowing your yarns, your fabric suppliers, and really trusting and having some really robust certification programs in place around where those materials are coming from, given that that's where the largest impact is typically from an environmental standpoint in the supply chain. So for me, I think I have benefited from everything keeping quite small from an impact perspective, so that I can visit these factories on an annual basis. I can know their first name. I can talk to them on a daily basis if I need to. But the second things start getting bigger and more contracted and subcontracted is where things start getting very complicated for brands. Maybe we can go into that a bit later, but I'd be curious to hear what Jonathan is seeing from a traceability standpoint.
Yeah, no, that's exactly our experience as well. So I think that, barriers to transparency at the first tier is really just companies maybe not wanting the potential risk of investigative organizations like ours sort of being able to readily connect dots if there are problems at their suppliers. But they know who their first tier suppliers are, of course, they have direct relationships with them. So that's just a matter of there being, I think, sufficient consumer pressure and advocacy pressure to really make sure that companies feel like they have to disclose at the first tier. At the second tier, I think, a lot of companies do know at least some of the suppliers in their second tier, particularly if they produce products that are maybe with more technical fabrics or something like that. They really will be designating where that material is coming from. But then the third tier, the fourth tier, that's where it gets difficult. And it takes a lot of diligent work to put systems in place so that they can track things back to the raw materials, to the farms, to the other places that raw materials come from. But we really have to keep advocating that become the norm, that we really not just stop at the first tier or even the second tier, that we go all the way back to raw materials. So we just recently did an investigation on cotton farms in Madhya Pradesh in India, and just very, very significant levels of child labor, very young kids who were not in school because they were picking cotton or doing other activities to support the cultivation of the cotton crop. And their parents weren't making enough to be able to keep their kids in school without the kids working. So, to get to a place where we can solve problems like that, we have to keep the pressure up so that companies feel like they have to make the investment that's required to trace things all the way back to that raw material level. Yeah.
I'll add just one more thing on that from the Textile Exchange lens, because that's a really good reminder. One of the few, I think, relevant and meaningful tools are these certification programs from on the fabric side of the supply chain. And Textile Exchange obviously oversees and has an umbrella of a series of pretty well used textile standards, whether it's global recycled standard, responsible wool, responsible alpaca, responsible down, many of which major brands are using. For example, they have over 100,000 sites that are certified to one of these Textile Exchange standards across the world at the raw material level. And what that standard system really hinges on is what they call the chain of custody, of how those materials move through the supply chain all the way up to the brand buying that finished fabric at their tier 2 supplier, and then actually putting it into a dress at their finished factory in tier 1. And how do you trace it from a cotton farm all the way to that final dress? And it does mean that there is a price difference between a certified material and a non-certified conventional material, which typically is anywhere from about 15 to 30% higher for those certified materials. And many brands just will not absorb that cost. And I was pretty shocked to find that even some of these luxury players that have such excessive margins aren't willing to make those investments in the certifications, because they, from a reputation standpoint, don't believe they need sustainability standards to underpin their supply chains, because they are who they are, and their brand speaks for themselves. So there is so much work to be done, to Jonathan's point, to really push for that level of traceability in the system and make it a requirement.
Yeah, and my next question is to Jonathan. What are the ethical and safety considerations in your investigative work?
Yeah. So we just have a whole manual that we use. There's so many different considerations to it, but I thought what might make the most sense to highlight is just the importance of informed consent in the evidence that we gather from people. Most of the evidence in our reports, in our investigations, come from speaking to workers themselves, sometimes their family members, other community members, other industry sources who can provide us information, often acting somewhat like a whistleblower. So it's just so critical for us, and we sort of customize the protocol that we use with every new project that we launch, that we are sure that we are informing the person that we're talking to about what it is that we want to talk to them about, how we plan to use that information, the risks that we see to potentially their participation in what we're doing, articulating any possible ways that we think that they may benefit, or the fact that they might not, so that they can make a very informed decision about whether or not they want to speak with us, and then how we can use that information. So that's just a really critical piece of the puzzle for us, because retaliation against workers is unfortunately, very real, and other sources, not just workers, I should say, is a very, very real risk in the work that we do. We've often seen that after we contact brands and retailers and they start engaging their supplier, there's often a hunt to try to figure out which workers spoke to us, and workers will be called in and they'll be grilled. And a lot of pressure will be applied to try to track down who it was that provided us the information that we accessed. And we've been fortunate so far that there haven't been, very severe repercussions to that. And I think it's because we do have very strict protocols that we follow, but that's just an ever-present risk for us. So that sort of consent, the importance of informed consent is just really, really critical for us. And hand in hand with that is then also, of course, like how we, how we communicate, how we transmit and store the information that people provide, and how diligent we are with anonymizing the material. So everything that we publish, it's not just, of course, that we would never share a worker's name, but we make sure that we don't even share specific, quotes from specific instances that they've shared with us, if we think that their manager or someone else at the factory might recall that incident, and if it's specific enough, and then know who it was that spoke to us. So that's something that we focus on a whole lot. Yeah.
You, Jonathan. And another question for Sydney. On a more macroeconomic level, do you think that tariffs alone can slow down ultra-fast fashion, or are these companies or is these tariffs just shifting where companies target their growth? For example, like pivoting to the EU?
Great question. I mean, like I'd mentioned on the de minimis portion, I do think we've seen a real radical slowdown from a business like Shein in the US specifically. I mean, if you think about their prices raising anywhere between 50 to 100% kind of overnight from the elimination of de minimis, that's really meaningful for a customer who is looking for a $10 item, and all of a sudden it's $15 to $20 now, but it's still $10 to $15, not $100 to $150. I do think your point about Shein, they were incredibly quick to respond to something like this by pushing all their advertising dollars over to the EU, where de minimis is still in place. So you've seen Shein become the fastest growing retailer in, I think, the UK in the past few months, and it will be the largest retailer there this year by the looks of things. I think that we are definitely going to see, in the macro sense, the worst of some of these price increases, or the really beginning of some of these consumer price increases in Q4. So we're about to come up on it and beyond. So I think we've been luckily, we're still in a bit of a bubble from inventory that was brought in before any of these new tariff rates were put in place. So we probably will not see much of that price increase until later this year into next year. Next year will be tough. The research that I've read and the publications I've read on this is really that we'll probably see off-price and discounting do very, very well in this market. So things like TJ Maxx and Ross that really benefit in an economic downturn. I think that could also extend to players like Shein that still just have a price advantage from low-cost production and materials that and all the petroleum in their supply chain. I don't think, obviously, we're seeing much of a consumer sentiment shift towards more sustainable alternatives. I think people are going to be tightening their belt. The one tailwind in the sustainability space will be, I think, is resale and re-commerce that really will and already is seeing such a boon to their business as other things have gotten more expensive, as luxury has obviously prices have gone completely bonkers in the past 6 months to a year, that have really seen the robustness of what those business models could look like for brands and for marketplaces, and that a customer, especially Gen Z, that just sees it as an important part of their mix. But I really don't, I think it's too soon to say what it means for ultra fast fashion.
And another question to Jonathan. Could you maybe share a little bit into your factory audits?
Yeah, so we noticed a pattern. This is just some insights that we've had on not really our audits, but the auditing industry at large. So across, I think after we'd completed a handful of different investigations, we just realized that there was a major flaw in the way that auditing is done, where companies or factories themselves hire auditing specialists to come in and look for, factory safety and working conditions, and sometimes other additional, workplace conditions. And what we saw was that often, even at facilities that were certified as silver, gold, or even platinum, we would still find either child labor or significant forced labor indicators and other major problems. So we have been doing a lot of advocacy around that. We actually wrote a report called Hidden Harm, where we sort of shared some of the findings that we'd seen, which is that workers were often hidden when auditors came. We heard from workers that they were either shifted to the dorms or, hidden in back rooms, so auditors couldn't find children. We, in several instances, heard from workers that they were coached by their managers to lie to auditors. Some of them were even paid to lie to auditors. Often also managers are very careful about selecting and have influence on who it is that auditors speak to. We also saw that companies were falsifying identity and other documents for workers to make them seem older, or to otherwise doctor documents so that they would conform with auditing standards. We saw the falsification of medical and dental records. And tying back to our work on recruitment fees, what we've now seen, now that the norm in the industry is changing, where workers are not allowed to pay recruitment fees, we're seeing that recruiters are forcing workers to video record statements saying that they have not paid recruitment fees, when in fact they actually have. So sometimes recruiters will now get paid by a factory for a worker's airfare and their visa costs, et cetera, but they'll still charge the worker for those fees as well, but then force the worker to lie about the fees that they've paid, and on and on and on. So the report outlines many other issues with the auditing industry. So there's just some sort of structural conflicts of interest within the industry as well that the report highlights. So yeah, thank you for letting me speak to that. It's been a major area for us.
And a last individual question to Sydney. Why do companies come to you, and what brings them to want to seek a sustainability and an ethicality just in their business model?
It's really a range of scenarios, but kind of briefly, it will be setting up a new supply chain in a new country, and just a lack of understanding about, let's say, how sourcing works in Peru. So I've got a client who wants to do baby apparel, and they really want to focus on a more vertically integrated supply chain with Pima cotton, and they've just never done it before. So often it will be kind of a sensitivity of, I don't know this category, I don't know the supply chain, I really want to do this right. Usually I want to start small. One of the areas that I've definitely built a kind of a bit of a niche around is this small batch production, and really helping and supporting that 0 to 1 stage for growth for designers and businesses. But then there's the diversification piece of people feeling uncomfortable with their existing supply chain, and either feeling they need to move out of China because of tariffs, or because of fear of blowback of what might happen within the geopolitical situation. And so it's a lot of the work that I do is on kind of diversification strategies for businesses to think about. And then the last one is often kind of more of a deep dive on materials and wanting to, you know, move from where a business maybe have launched and just been opportunistic about the fabrics that they were working with and using stock fabric that maybe they were able to find, and realizing as they scale up, they actually don't know how to go and find ethical fabric suppliers that source really well and have really good relationships with the upstream suppliers as well. So it's walking through kind of impact strategies and material mixes for how to source better fibers that have lower impact.
Yeah, and a final question to both of our speakers. How can our community get involved with the work that you're doing?
I'll go first just because I'm off mute. So yes, you can certainly find me at mile1.co, no com. And then I also have a Substack that I'll pop on here, where I write a lot about entrepreneurship mixed with fashion sustainability, kind of things that I'm really passionate about, if anyone wants to follow. I offer office hours for, especially for students and people kind of pivoting in their careers. I've had a very non-traditional path to this space, so I'm always excited to talk to people kind of really thinking about trying to bring sustainability into their work. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I can maybe just plug our socials, LinkedIn, X, Blue Sky, where you can follow our work. Where when we have projects coming out, you know, we yeah, I'll always alert folks there. We also have an analyst position available at the moment if anyone is job hunting and interested. And yeah, just really looking forward to staying connected with Remake. And yeah, please reach out if there's anything that yeah, a connection might be helpful with.
Thank you so much, Elise. Thank you, Jonathan, Sydney. Thank you for moderating, Elise. Everybody, this is Elise's second day of school, and she's joining us here and just moderated this incredible panel. So thank you, Sydney and Jonathan. Thank you, and just your deep insights and giving us an inside look into what you do. I certainly feel like, as someone who over the years has done a lot of independent research on global supply chains, I feel like I have such a more clear picture of what goes on after this conversation and hearing you two speak. I also want to thank Sarah for joining us and sharing her experience of giving locally and raising funds for direct relief. And of course, a big thank you to all of you for showing up today and being part of this conversation. Before we sign off, I want to remind you all again of Remake's Maiden series, and it will continue this fall on our social media for ways to get involved, and finding more ways to amplify garment workers' voices and give us calls to action. So we encourage you to share those with your network and host screenings later into the fall. You can always reach out to me for collaboration to keep the conversation going. We're going to send a recap today, so you will have a recording of this call and you will have links for our speakers. Sydney's Substack, I'm a big fan, and she's going to share her office hours with us. And lastly, if today inspired you, I would just love for you to join us on Circle, and we'll send another link for that to join us if you're not there already, so you can take part in our upcoming programs. And I just want to thank you all for being here. Thank you to our speakers, and we look forward to seeing you at our next community call in December. So have a wonderful season, a great kickoff for this month, and I'll see you soon. See everybody soon. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, Sydney.
Thanks, Holly. Thanks, all.
Thanks, Elise.
You guys.
Thank you.